Hi, to anybody out there. So my name, well, my, let me start again. I'm Podcast Paul, and for the past 8 months, I've been heavily involved in podcasting and launch. And what I'm not doing very well here. Let's start again. So, hi, I'm Podcast Paul. That's too cheesy, right? That's so cheesy. But listen, what I wanted to do really is just share some insights and some thoughts and some suggestions on podcasting. So, just to give you a little background about me, I stumbled into the world of podcasting probably at March time, 2020. Yeah, we did a podcast during the pandemic. Great thinking, right? And as a result of that, honestly, I love the podcast world. It's an amazing place to be. It's an amazing channel. And as a result, I did the podcast coach. Initially, I started with the idea of helping individuals to launch their podcast, to take it from zero to launch. But actually, over the past kind of four months, what's happened is that's moved into not just helping individuals out, but more so moving into helping companies out. So companies are starting to realize that the podcast platform or the podcast media or whatever you want to call it really is an untapped resource in terms of generating leads and obviously generating additional sales and in terms of getting your message out there. So I've pivoted a little bit now with the podcast coach and moved more to helping companies who see the benefits of launching the podcast and just really need the help and assistance because it can be quite labor intensive, to be honest with you, particularly the startup in terms of not sure where to go or really they don't know how to start it up. So for the past couple of weeks, I've been posting daily 2 minutes with Podcast Paul. Super cheesy, So 2 minutes videos with Podcast Paul in terms of, just sharing my insights and thoughts and I wouldn't say expertise yet, but I'm still learning and I just want to help people out. So what I thought I'd do is that every Friday I'd extend that session, depending on how today goes, obviously. I'd extend that session from 2 minutes to 20 minutes and see if there's any questions or anything I can help with. So just to summarize the daily posts that I've been doing, I started with, so when you come to launch your podcast, the first thing you need to do is understand your why. So what's your why? Why are you launching the podcast, right? What's the driver behind it, whether that's from a business owner perspective, a company perspective, or an individual perspective? What are you looking to do? Why are you launching the podcast in the first place? You can't really progress to the next step, and I'll talk that to you in a minute, without really knowing what your why is. I know there's a famous book out there by Simon Sinek that says start with your why, and it's super, super important when it comes to starting your podcast because your why will then more or less drive everything else in terms of your marketing strategy, your artwork, what you call the podcast. Really, it starts with your why. So before you even get into podcasting or get into the fun stuff of recording and editing, creating all the artwork and what have you, you really need to know what your why is. All right. So when you've got your why, and just to kind of give you an example of what whys are. So as I said before, the podcast channel or podcast platform, it's excellent in terms of getting your message out there, right? But it also helps in terms of you becoming or your company becoming the company of choice in a particular field, right? Because you're speaking in real time to your customers, you generate that extra level of support and that extra level of trust that maybe some of your competitors are missing, which is why it's important that you understand your why. All right, so you've got your why, you use the platform to speak to your customers, particularly if you're launching something new, if you're launching a brand new service or a brand new product or something like that, then it's a really useful tool to speak to your customers and to get real-time feedback. Also, and this is actually only come to light recently, to be honest with you, is that it's a great tool for employee engagement. Using the podcast, it allows you to speak directly to all of your employees, and you can get again real-time feedback. But more importantly, you can share what the company vision is, whether that's the next 12 months, the next 3 years, 5 years, whatever it may be. using podcasting means that you can do that through an ongoing channel, right? Even if it's just like a weekly update, you can do that to drive employee engagement. So employee engagement is also something you need to consider when you're looking to start your podcast. So we spoke about the why. Well, I spoke about the why. Let's now talk about the niche. So you've got your why, now your niche. So your niche market is next, right? So again, when you've got your why, automatically, by default, you know what your niche market is. So then you can target your niche market with the next step, which is your message. So those really are the 3 steps that you go through before you start your podcast journey. So you start with the why, then your niche, and then your message. And as long as you've gone through those steps, then you can then go into the next part, which is where the fun begins, right? So you've done your why, your niche, and your message. Next one, excuse me, sorry. Next one is your podcast name. All right. Now, this can be absolutely anything you want it to be. However, in my opinion, there needs to be a link back into your why, right? So when it comes to choosing your name, you can be as creative as you want, but ultimately you need to make sure that there is a kind of link into what you do or what your message is. And it can be as straightforward as it's a crime podcast. So you can call it Paul's Crime Podcast, for example. So at least people know when they come to search across the platforms. So, you're looking at Apple Podcasting, Spotify, Google, Amazon. There's a shed load of platforms on there to post your podcast. It's important that when you come up with a name, that it links back so that when people are searching for it, it makes sense what they're searching for. All right. Then the next part is your artwork. Again, your artwork links into your why. We've spoken about, you can't really create the podcast until you've done your why. So that's that's not your first step, but in terms of your artwork, now bear in mind that your artwork is the first visual representation your customers or your audience will get of your podcast, whether that's linked into a personal matter or whether that's linked into business. Bear in mind that your artwork is the first thing your potential customers and your potential audience members will see, right? So it's important that you get that right. Then I did want to spend a little time talking about equipment. I recently actually got asked by a friend of mine, what equipment would I recommend and all that type of stuff. Honestly, the beauty about podcasting is you can do it as simply as you can do it off your phone, right? You can do it off your phone, you can do it off your laptop or your desktop, whatever it may be. It really comes down to how much you want to spend and how invested you are in your podcast. So I think you have to ask those questions before you go out and spend any type of money. There's some really excellent platforms out there that will allow you to edit and publish and host your podcast for you. The one that really springs to mind is Anchor. So Anchor is the one-stop shop for all podcasting. It will let you do your intros, your outros, your editing, everything there. And then it will also push your podcast out to the different platforms. So you've got Anchor there that will help you. And then you've got Podbean and Buzzsprout. Those are probably the 3 most popular ones. I use Podbean. And to be fair with you, it gives me what I want. You get X amount for free, and then you do have to pay a yearly subscription to get unlimited uploads, downloads. But what I like about Podbean is that the reporting aspect of it is very, very straightforward. You can log in, you can go onto the dashboard, and it will show you day on day how well your podcast is performing and which episodes are performing the best, etc., right? So there is a lot of tools out there when it comes to podcasting, but those are the 3 that I would recommend. So just go again. So it was Anchor, and then you've got Podbean, and then you've got Buzzsprout. So those are the ones that, if you're interested in starting your podcast, then those are the ones I would recommend. And then you kind of move into editing. Now, I'm going to put this link on the screen because, honestly, I don't know how to pronounce it. So there's a link for you. I think it's Alitu. Is that right? Have I pronounced it correctly? Alitu.com. That's an editing suite that, again, you do have to pay a monthly subscription for. I think it's about £20. But it will let you do all your editing. So when you've created your intros and outros, you can upload those onto this platform. and then you can spend time editing the editing the podcast as you wish. I will warn you though, that's time consuming in terms of doing your own editing. I started to use the platform, and it's a great platform. It's really easy to use, and well, without kind of repeating myself, it's extremely easy to use. However, it's very, very time consuming when you come to edit your own podcast, because you're listening to the ums and the ahs, and then you've got to edit in your intros and your outros. So it is time consuming when it comes to editing. So you may, if you have the time and you're that invested, then by all means, I would recommend downloading that platform there. No, it's that side, right? A little bit more there, that one there. Yeah, it's a great platform, and I actually found that off. There's another good website I would recommend if you're looking to get into podcasting, and that's www.podcasthost.com. It's run by a guy called Colin. I forget his surname. He's a Scottish guy, although that doesn't mean anything at all. But yeah, I would recommend having a look at that podcast, that website too. There's some really helpful hints and tips on there. So that's for your editing. That's that again. There. Okay. Now, I know everybody's a busy person, and I know that while you want to get into podcasting, sometimes it does get a little bit time consuming. I won't lie to you. It is time consuming, particularly when you're starting to launch it, and then depending on how often you publish your podcast, that in itself is time consuming because of the editing side of things. So if you don't really have that amount of time to invest, then let me suggest a freelance website. So there's a freelance website out there called www.fiverr.com. I use this a lot. A lot of my friends use it business-wise as well. There's great people on there that you can go with your editing, your artwork, even promoting your podcast. You can go to this website, and there's a lot of experts in there that will help you. Let me rephrase that. There's a lot of experts there that when you speak to them will know instinctively what you want to do. So in some instances, you just need to give them the name of your podcast, and then they will go away and create the artwork for you. Obviously, you need to explain to them what the premise is. You need to give them a flavour for it. But yeah, as long as you've got the name out there, then they can more or less create everything else. So that's kind of the editing suite, and then you've got the freelance side there as too. One thing that I did want to talk about, and I think sometimes people underestimate the importance of your intros and outros. So apologies, I didn't really want to talk, what do they call it? Tech speak, right? Jargon. There you go, jargon. But intros and outros are unsurprisingly the first thing you hear when you tune into the podcast and your podcast, and then the last thing you hear when you leave it, like when it's done. My advice here is when you do the intro, make sure that obviously you welcome your listeners. But I would also try to put in there a little bit about what the podcast is. So include the name and include your name as the host. And if you're co-hosting it as well, then include the co-host name as well. If you're getting guests on, then it does get a little bit pricey in terms of constantly having to edit your intros and your outros when you're getting your guests on. Now, if you have an in-house solution, if you're a business, for example, and you have a marketing department and they have their own recording studio, then it does become a little bit easier for you. The challenge is if you're not, and you're doing this, a one-man band type of thing who's just trying to get their podcast out there, then it does become expensive. I'm not going to lie to you. So I would try to keep the opening as generic as possible, include obviously your name, the podcast name, welcome your listeners. And also then when you come to the end bit, crucial, make sure that you include where people can find the podcast, right? Make sure you've got like a Twitter handle or something like that. So make sure you include that in the outros. But also more importantly, make sure that you ask or you encourage your audience listeners, your listeners, right? Yeah, your audience, to subscribe and rate your podcast on Apple. It's extremely important though. So your 5-star podcast, those are the ones who really get kind of the traction in the podcast world. So again, at the end, you can obviously mention it in the podcast recording, but excuse me, make sure it's in your outro, that you're saying something in there that says, oh, guys, thanks very much. Really appreciate your support. If you could, please go to Apple, or just, doesn't matter where, but please subscribe and review and rate and leave a comment. Even the great Gary Vaynerchuk, the super successful US entrepreneur, he does it at the end of every single podcast. He asks people to rate and review it, and I think he uses a lot on the lines of, it would really mean the world to him. So yeah, so it's important, right? It's important that when you come into the outro bit, that you do include something along the lines of the intros and the outros, particularly the outros, and asking your audience members to go and subscribe and review and rate the podcast. Yeah, I don't want to undermine that. That's hugely important. That's something now that I'm working on with a couple of the clients in terms of encouraging people to go and rate your podcast, right? So one of the clients that I'm working with now, we're looking at a promotion to get more reviews, more 5-star reviews, right? So this guy's a wonderful business guy. He really knows his stuff. And what we're thinking of at the moment is all those 5 stars every month, all those 5-star reviews every month, they go into a pot, they go into a raffle, and then you pull a name out of the hat, and then that person gets 30 minutes with this business guru or something like that, right? Anything that will encourage people to rate, to review, and subscribe, and just really drive the awareness and the awareness really of your podcast. So yeah, listen, guys, I've rattled on a little bit and I've gone here, there, and everywhere. It's my first time doing something like this, so apologies if it's crap. I've tried to keep it as succinct as possible. Going back quickly to the technical side of things, look, you can go to Amazon, you can get a decent mic and a ring light there that you can probably see in my glasses. But again, it's really how much you're willing to spend. In terms of recording it, this is something I didn't mention before, sorry. Yes, you can record on Anchor, but also you can record through Zoom and Google Meets. So if you're doing remotely, if there's 2 of you doing it, and obviously with COVID or you're in different locations globally, you can simply jump onto a Google Meets or a Zoom bridge, record the meeting, and then download it, and then go and edit it into the editing suites that I've spoken about. So yeah, so that's a way of doing it. Again, it really depends on how much you're willing to invest and really what you're driving for. And again, what your why is for the podcast, right? That's the bit. If you're only doing it for a bit of a giggle or whatever it may be, you just want to share your hobbies or something, then maybe you don't want to invest that amount of money, and that's absolutely fine. It's entirely up to you, and whatever works best for you. I'm not here to go out and tell you to spend hundreds of pounds or hundreds of dollars on a recording studio. That's really up to you. But there is, you can go to Amazon, you can go to Target in the US and pick up some really decent mics and decent ring lights that are relatively inexpensive. And the ring light is really important when it comes to posting. If you decide to turn your podcast into a video, when you create all your social media channels, you can then create the video from your podcast, because Google Meet and Zoom will record the audio and the visual. And then what you can do is you can then post the recording on your YouTube channel. It links into your podcast so that you've got audio and visual representation. But again, that's entirely up to you. That I'm just sharing what I've learned on my journey. So look, we're coming to the last 30 seconds of 20 minutes with Podcast Paul. I really apologize if I've bored you. All I wanted to do was share some hints and tips on podcasting and kind of what I've learned as I've gone through the journey. A shout out to everybody that supported me on my journey so far. You know who you are. I'm not going to name names, but I really appreciate all the love and support I get. And I will start again on Monday with the 2 minutes with Podcast Paul, providing everybody likes it. Guys, thank you very much for your time. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye.